Good morning, students. I hope you've had a chance to be active today. I know it's overcast and rainy outside, so maybe you still put on your rain jacket, your slicker, and went outside for a nice walk, or maybe you managed to do something online like a Go Noodle or an online yoga class. Just be sure you have a chance to be active. Or maybe you were practicing some handstands. Let's take a look at our morning message. March 25th, 2020. Dear students, today is the last day I'll be reading to you about Abraham Lincoln. What facts can you remember, review, retell? Mrs. Kilmer. Now let's take a look at the last three words in the message again. Remember, review, retell. What do you notice about all those words? We use them a lot in school. They all start with re. And today I want to remind you about something we've talked about before. The idea of word parts. Word parts. So there are parts of words at the beginning and parts of words at the end that add meaning to the main word. In this case, I want to remind you about re. Re is a prefix. That means it is a word part that comes at the beginning of a word. Re means to do over again. And some examples of re that we use all the time in school are remember, review, reread, retell. So students, what I want you to do is I want you to start keeping track of wherever you see the word re, the word part re at the beginning of a word. Maybe you could note it down, kind of like a word hunt, and send them along to me in your emails, okay? We're going to start a big list of all the words we can find that have the prefix re. In a minute, I'm going to go ahead and read to you our last book together about Abraham Lincoln. Today I'm going to read to you Abe Lincoln's Hat. So I know we've talked about his stovepipe hat, that it is almost kind of like a symbol for Abraham Lincoln. And there I see him dashing down the road and a bunch of papers flying out of his hat. Let's read the blurb on the back of the book. Abe Lincoln always wore a tall black hat. But do you know what else he did with it? You'd never guess a hat could be so useful or so important. You'd never guess Lincoln could be so funny. Read all about him in this wonderful, true story. I think some of us do already know what a funny guy Lincoln was. There's a little picture of Lincoln. Looks like maybe he's on Old Bob in the rain. And here on the title page, says Abe Lincoln's Hat by Martha Brenner, illustrated by Donald Cook. And there is an interesting illustration where it shows Abraham Lincoln, maybe a little bit younger and maybe not with so much money. He's dressed kind of with patches on his clothes a little, and looking inside a shop window he sees a top hat, a stovepipe hat. Maybe that's trying to tell us about what it might have been like the first time he looked and bought one of those kinds of hats. Abe Lincoln didn't have much money, but when he became a lawyer, he wanted to look his best. He bought a long black coat and a tall black hat. There he is in the store. Every day, Abe wore his hat to his new job. People noticed the tall man in the tall hat. He was friendly to everyone. When they needed a lawyer, they remembered him. So I see him walking down the street. I see a sign, Stewart and Lincoln Attorneys. Attorney is like a word for lawyer, so that must be where he's working. And it looks like he's greeting people on the street. He's tipping his hat to that lady. That was considered good manners, buen modales, to tip your hat. Oh, this looks like it's maybe going back to when he was young. Abe lived in Illinois. His state was mostly wilderness. Then more and more settlers came. They built houses and farms and new towns. Sometimes they didn't get along. They argued over land and animals and money. Lawyers like Abe could help people settle their arguments. They could help people get a fair trial in court. Oh goodness, it looks like these two guys are arguing over a pig, and they're just trying to pull it away from each other. Abe Lincoln was a smart lawyer. People came to him with all kinds of problems. He helped them all. But he had one problem himself. In the picture, it's like he's scratching his head thinking about something. He forgot to answer letters. He forgot where he put important papers. A good lawyer cannot forget. Abe wanted to be a good lawyer, but he was not a good paper keeper. What could he do? Oh my goodness, look at his office. Piles of paper everywhere, piles of papers pouring out of the bookshelves. Goodness gracious. Gotta stay organized. Abe had an idea. His tall hat. He could push letters deep inside it. He could stuff notes into the leather band. When he took off his hat, the papers would remind him what he had to do. The idea worked, most of the time. One day some boys played a trick on Abe. They tied a string across the street. They strung it way up high. Everyone in town could walk under it. Everyone except Abe. Remember how tall he was? Remember, he was 6'4", and so with his top hat on, he would be almost 7 feet tall. That's very tall. When Abe walked down the street, the string knocked off his hat. Papers flew everywhere. He bent over to pick them up. The boys ran out of hiding. They jumped all over him. Abe laughed. He was not mad at the boys. He liked a good joke. But the trick did not stop him from carrying papers in his hat. Oh, when I see that, I'm also making a connection to how much he loved spending time with his boys. Remember, he had 4 boys of his own, and those wild, crazy times they had at home and also in the White House. Once a lawyer sent Abe a letter. Abe stuck it in his hat. The next day, Abe bought a new hat. He put away his old one. Uh-oh, I can see some papers in the hat still. The old one that he's putting away. Weeks later, the lawyer wrote again. Why didn't you answer my letter? Then Abe remembered. The letter was still in his old hat. Many towns in Illinois had no lawyers and no judges. Remember, judges are the people who sit in front of the people who have an argument with each other, and each person or each side has a lawyer to help argue their position, and then the judge makes a decision. So every spring and fall, a judge and some lawyers traveled from town to town. Abe went too. He packed his hat with papers, his checkbook, and a handkerchief. Remember, a handkerchief is like a piece of cloth to clean things off, to blow your nose. At the head of the parade of lawyers rode the judge. No one could miss him. He weighed over 300 pounds. 2 horses pulled his buggy. Oh my goodness. He was so big, over 300 pounds, it took 2 horses to make his buggy go. Abe's horse was skinny and slow. His name was Old Buck. Oh, that's interesting. I guess maybe this is Old Buck, a different horse than his later horse, Old Bob. Abe and Old Buck traveled lonely country roads, in the snow, in the rain, in the mud. Oh, hey, there's where the author told details in 3s. Remember, we've talked about providing details in 3s? In the snow, in the rain, in the mud. 3 details. Traveling made Abe very tired. He dreamed of a soft bed and a good meal, but the lawyers had to stay at poor country inns. The food was bad, the rooms were cold, the beds were crawling with bugs. The lawyers had to share beds, except the judge. He had his own bed. Early in the morning, the courthouse bell would ring. Abe hurried to court. Pigs lived under one courthouse. Abe had to talk loudly over the grunts and squeals. People came from near and far to hear Abe. He He made trials easy to understand. So the trial is when everyone gathers together to argue for their position in front of the judge. He made trials easy to understand. He told jokes and stories. People said he could make a cat laugh. Make a cat laugh? Once Abe whispered a joke to another lawyer. The lawyer laughed out loud. "Quiet!" the judge yelled. "You are fined $5. A fine is when you have to pay money for doing something wrong. When the trial was over, the judge asked to hear the joke. He laughed as hard as the lawyer. "That was worth $5, he said. "Forget the fine." I'm glad the judge had a sense of humor. He enjoyed jokes too. At another trial, two men argued over who owned a young horse. Each said he owned the mother of the colt. Abe led everyone outside. He put the two grown horses on one side of the lawn. He held the colt on the other side. Then he set the colt free. It headed straight to its real mother. What a clever idea to decide to figure out to whom the colt belonged. One day Abe got a letter. It was from Hannah Armstrong. Years before, Abe had lived with her family. Mrs. Armstrong cooked for Abe. She sewed up the holes in his pants. Now she begged Abe for help. Her son Duff was in jail for murder. Abe did not stick this letter in his hat. He wrote back right away. "Of course I'll help you." I wonder what happened. This is quite exciting and a little worrisome. Oh, here's the story of what happened. Duff had been in a big fight. It was very dark, but a man said he saw Duff kill someone. Duff said he did not do it. Abe believed Duff, but how could he prove that the man was wrong or lying? And there's a picture of the fight in the dark. "How could you see in the dark?" Abe asked the man. "The moon was full," the man said. "It was as bright as day." So there was a full moon. So the man is saying that's how he could see what was happening in the dark, because there was a full moon. And they're in court, so he should be telling the truth. "Are you sure the moon was full?" Abe asked again and again. "Yes," the man repeated. Then Abe held up a famous book of facts. It said there was no moon in the sky at the time of the fight. Now no one believed the man anymore. The judge set Duff free. Yeah, so that's a special kind of book called an almanac. And an almanac is a book that tells about the cycle of the moon and the sun and some things about the stars and the weather and the seasons. And if you look at an almanac, it will tell you when there were full moons. And apparently there was not a full moon that night, even though this man said there was. Abe believed slavery was wrong. His state had laws against it, but the laws were not clear. Many blacks were treated like slaves. Nance was one of them. She worked for a storekeeper who sold her to another man. This man treated Nance badly, so she would not work for him. Abe argued for Nance in court. Illinois was a free state. He said all its people are free, whatever their color. The judge decided Abe was right. From then on, no one could be bought or sold in Illinois. Abe had saved Nance, but half the states in America still had slaves. In a few years, there would be new states out west. Abe did not want slavery to spread to these states. Oh, and this is great. Here's a picture that has a map that shows what we've been talking about, how in the north, those were called free states, and in the south, those were called slave states. And these states wanted to keep their slaves. And also, the north and the south were worried about this green area called the new lands, or the territories, about whether those would be able to be free or slave states. Abe tried to get elected to the U.S. Senate. If he won, he could make laws to stop slavery. He ran against Stephen Douglas. Douglas argued that each state should decide for itself if it wanted slaves. They gave speeches all over Illinois. Thousands of people heard them. Abe lost the election, but he became famous. He became famous because of all his speeches. He was a very good speaker. In 1860, Abe ran for president. Stephen Douglas ran too, and this time Abe won. Abe grew a beard for his new job. He took his family to Washington. At every train station, crowds cheered the new president. Abe was ready to make his first speech as president. He carried a cane, that's like a stick, a tall silk hat, and his speech. He looked for a place to put his hat. Stephen Douglas stepped up. "If I can't be president," he said, "I can at least hold his hat." Abe Lincoln was a great president. He freed the slaves. He worked for fair laws. He helped unite the nation after a long war. But he never changed his ways. He always kept important papers in his tall hat. And on this last page, I'll tell you, students, like some of the other books we've read in class, some of you have read George Washington and the General's Dog, for example. This is a true story. And in the back here, we have a photograph of Judge David Davis, the real judge. There's a photograph, because remember, there was photography in Lincoln's time. Duff Armstrong. There's a photograph of Stephen Douglas. And there is another photograph of Abraham Lincoln. And these are all, remember, called portraits because they're of people. All the stories in this book are true, and all the people really lived. Here are photos of some of them. When the photos were taken around 1860, the camera was a new invention. Isn't that remarkable? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the book, Abe Lincoln's Hat. And I hope you enjoyed remembering, reviewing, and I was retelling you some facts that you already knew, plus some new facts from the book. So please be sure that you keep on the lookout for words that start with the prefix re, and send them to me, okay? And we'll start our big lesson. Okay. I look forward to seeing you again this afternoon when I'll be reading some fun fiction book. See you later.